The Los Angeles City Council has decided not to extend the rent freeze and instead only allow landlords to increase their rents by 4%, much less than what's needed due to inflation. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting update to an article I just covered a few days back, and it has to do with the Los Angeles City Council deciding that, hey, we're not going to be seeing an extended rent freeze, okay? And it's kind of surprising, okay? I told you in the video that I made just a few days back that, hey, I would be shocked and surprised if they decided that they didn't want to extend this thing further, but apparently they decided not to do that. And it's a pleasant surprise, but when you look and see what they decided the compromise was, you suddenly realize that, oh, well, they're still doing landlords dirty. Okay, they're still screwing landlords over. So we've seen inflation in the last few years of nearly 9% per year. Okay. And landlords in LA who have rent controlled apartments haven't been able to increase their rents at all for the last 3.5 years. But now they're only going to allow a small, absolutely tiny 4% increase. So, in spite of the fact that all of the costs have increased for landlords throughout the entire city, right? They are only allowing a minuscule increase. And guess what? The tenant rights groups, they're still complaining, oh my goodness, oh no, we're the only ones suffering. Well, I'm sorry, but that's just not the case. It's not the case at all. And landlords, like everyone else, are facing the exact same effects of inflation that you're facing. So we're facing increased utility costs, increased insurance costs, property taxes are going up, maintenance costs are going up, capital expenditures, replacing that furnace or that roof on your property, they're all way, way more expensive than they were just a few years back. Yet landlords there have not had the ability to increase their rents at all, and they can't keep it pace with inflation with this little tiny minuscule 4% increase, which is basically nothing. It's basically nothing for the tenants there in the county or the city who are receiving who receive the benefits of the rent freeze. So yeah, it's a bad situation. I imagine that the financial distress that these landlords are feeling, it's not going to be coming to an end anytime soon, and it's going to lead to the point where we're going to see properties where landlords, instead of doing the maintenance on these properties, they're going to be band-aiding stuff together so that it just basically functions, but it's not going to be updated. We're not going to see anything. It's just going to basically make the housing stock be in a worse condition, and that it's bad. It's going to end up pretty bad for the tenants out there. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think. Are you surprised that the LA City Council decided, hey, we're not going to be extending this rent freeze? And do you think they're going to try to, go out there and throw more tenant protections out there, maybe screw landlords over in some other way? Anyway, put a comment down below. Let me know what you think of this whole situation, and let's get into this article. This article is coming from NBCLosAngeles.com, and it says, LA City Council Committee rejects rent increase ban extension. And there is a video that goes with it, and I'll play part of that video for you right now.
I think that it is very, very, very short-sighted.
Property owner Mike Werner says the city of LA's so-called compromise on rent increases isn't much of one. An LA City Council committee has approved a plan to allow apartment rents to go up 4% next year instead of 7%, with an additional 2% for owner-paid utilities, scheduled to go effect in February of 2024. So what I hear you saying is 4% isn't nearly enough.
Oh, God, no.
Owners like Werner say building costs like insurance have skyrocketed during a more than 3.5-year ban on rent increases. Nearly 3/4 of apartments in Los Angeles are under rent control and at least 45 years old, which owners say make them even more expensive to maintain.
The price of absolutely everything has gone through the ceiling. I think there's a misconception that this is a very high margin business. It is not.
All right, you saw the video. Let's get into the article. The Los Angeles City Council Committee has rejected calls for an extension of the ban on rent increases that started during the COVID-19 pandemic and is instead offering a plan with a smaller increase. The committee has approved a plan to allow apartment rents to increase by 4% in 2024 rather than 7%, with an additional 2% for owner and paid utilities. The plan would go into effect in February. Property owner Mike Werner said the city's so called compromise isn't much of a compromise at all. He said building costs like insurance have skyrocketed during the 3.5 year span of the rent increase ban. The price of everything has gone through the roof, Werner said. I think there is a misconception that this is a very high margin business, and it is not. Renters and activists say owners enjoyed low inflation and 3% rent increases before the pandemic and can now afford to tighten the belt so that people can stay in their homes. Yeah, that's a pretty ignorant outlook, right? And I wouldn't expect tenant rights advocates and renters to think of something so stupid, okay? They're like, oh, well, you guys had low inflation before. Well, there has always been inflation, yeah, and the inflation was lower than it is right now, right? But that doesn't mean that in the past, before the pandemic, we weren't facing increased costs. That's just not the case. We were facing increased costs, and that is part of the reason why we had to increase our rents before. Now, they say that, oh, up until then, they were allowed 3% rent increases, but that doesn't help any if the rent was already below what the market was dictating rents should be. So if the landlords were already struggling to keep pace with 3% rent increases back in 2018, 2019, etc., right? Then what do you think they were doing after these last 3 years? And that doesn't even call into the fact that, hey, a lot of these landlords have had to refinance their properties. They're facing higher costs, for the loans, etc., just so that they can stay afloat. Okay, don't doubt for 1 second that there are a lot of landlords struggling in Los Angeles right now, and that they could go under at any point in time. This would be very bad for the tenants. This would be very bad for the landlords, bad for the city as a whole. But I'm not surprised by any of this stuff, okay? They treat small business owners like garbage in California, and particularly in Los Angeles. They treat us like, hey, you're privileged to be here. No, no. There's plenty of places where they treat us better than this, and we can make money there too. And that's what a lot of landlords are doing. They're selling, they're getting out of the business, they're deciding, hey, I don't want to deal with this nonsense anymore. They're figuring out ways to get these buildings out of rent control, be it they got to tear the whole place down and go out of the rental business. But whatever it is, right, they are figuring out that, hey, it's just not worth the price of admission to do business in a place that they, just don't respect you. There's a lot of economic stuff we're dealing with. The price of gas is one that continues to go up, renter Leonardo Vilches Zarate said. I'm working 2 jobs trying to get by. The 6-month extension for the rent increase ban was proposed by Councilmember Hugo Soto Martinez. The 4% increase plan will now go before the City Council for a vote. 4% is better than 7%, but even 4% is going to hurt a lot of people in the city, Coalition for Economic Survival Executive Director Larry Gross said. Now, going back, a couple of paragraphs to that tenant rights advocate who was talking, saying that, hey, the price of gas keeps going up. Well, I guess the landlord doesn't have to buy gas, right? Oh, yeah, yeah. It blows my mind that these people, they think that they're the only ones impacted by inflation. Like landlords are living in some sort of a bubble where inflation doesn't exist. What a joke. And yeah, you did the right thing by going out there and getting a second job in order to pay your bills, because that is what a responsible person would do. They would go out there, do whatever they can to increase their income so that they can afford their rent. They wouldn't expect the landlord to artificially subsidize their rent, or the government to artificially subsidize their rent, or the government to pay their bills for them. But that is what we're dealing with in a place like Los Angeles, where they have a socialist system put into place where basically you have a huge group of people who are 100% dependent upon the government to make sure that they pay their bills for them. And it's a failing idea. It just doesn't work. It does not work. These people will eventually become so dependent upon the government, and there will be a huge exodus of people out of there who are saying, I'm paying all this tax money towards the city of Los Angeles so that I can support these people over here to live cheap. That's dumb. And you know what? when you run out of people paying taxes, that's when socialism fails. Okay, when you run out of landlords who are willing to subsidize these people's rent, that's when their socialism project will fail.